Hello and welcome to the 2019 CDO Virtual Event, Empowering Business Through Data. My name is Natasha Guzman with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Looker for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Looker. We appreciate you joining us. We welcome you to stay connected during today's virtual event. You can follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, CIO CISO Forum. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Joel McKelvey, Director of Product Marketing at Looker. We are pleased to have you here with us, Joel. Welcome, and now over to you.
Thanks, Natasha. I appreciate it, and thank you to everyone who's attending today. In line with the content policy, what we're going to try and do today is present some trends that we've learned about here in Looker in the industry so that you can get an idea of our thoughts and maybe get the benefit of some of the polling we've done out in the ecosystem of people we work with every day here at Looker. So you probably, as attendees here, understand the value of data, understand the value of analytics more than most. But I think this quote from Brent in Inc. Magazine really sums it up very well. It's based on a KPMG study that was done in 2017. And essentially what we're saying is that businesses that really do well with data are better businesses, right? They're better capable of competing. They're better capable of delivering products and services to their customers the way that they need to. We've seen that with some of the companies that we work closely with at Looker. Here's a good quote from Glossier. If you don't know Glossier, they are a direct-to-consumer skincare and makeup brand. As a father with 2 teenage daughters, I know Glossier quite well. They have a significant wallet share in my household. And what they've been doing is expanding and growing as a business very, very rapidly throughout the US and now Europe. And they're using data to really drive that by connecting closer with their customers. This quote is consistent with what we're hearing from all of the companies that we tend to work with. IDG just did a research study in January of this year, January 2019, and the CIOs in their research study say that they're increasingly being tasked with moving into a more strategic role in their businesses. 55% of them are aiming to accomplish that by getting to know their customers better. And customer data is going to play a huge role in supporting the CIO and the CDO's responsibility within the business as they move into a more strategic role inside their organizations. But it's a little bit more than that, too. Counsel is a genetic screening company that works with women and their families to get actionable information so they can make critical and timely health decisions. And what they're seeing at Counsel as they work with data is that the people in their realm, in the healthcare realm, in the genetic screening realm, can do more now than they could ever do before, because there's more data available in the places where they need it in order to make the relevant decisions with their business to help out their customers so that their customers can make some very critical and timely decisions as well. So the power of data is very, very real. It's very strong, and it's made a significant difference for companies that harness it well. But it's not easy. I think we can all agree that there are challenges around using the data that we want to see. Only about 31% of organizations describe themselves as data-driven, according to a research study from New Vantage Partners in their survey in 2019. So, roughly a third of companies believe that they're doing a very good job of this. And the reason why it is not working as well as we would hope, or it's been hard for some of us to adopt a real data-driven approach, is because of some macro trends in the way that technology works and the way that data works and the way that analytics works. Now, again, those of you on the line here probably understand the challenges of data supply more than we do at Looker. You may be familiar with the 3 V's of data: the volume, variety, and velocity of data. There's more than ever before. There's more types of it than ever before. It's growing very quickly. We've added a 4th V, I think, as an industry in the last year or so around veracity, which is there's data out there which may not be fresh or it may not be accurate. And so we're trying to make sure that we also have veracity in the data as it comes. But I think the thing to take away from trends in data supply is that this is a geometric change. We will have more than twice as much data next year. We will have more than twice as many sources next year. IDC did a study on the total number of SaaS applications that are producing data for the average enterprise company. And depending on how you slice that data, it's between around 400 and 900 SaaS applications in the average enterprise company. And they're all generating data. They all have it in different schemas and formats in different places. And that is very challenging for us to accomplish. What many of us may not have thought about, and I think this is a really exciting difference in the way of thinking, is that data supply and data demand mirror each other very well. We have more users who need access to data than we ever have had before. They have different roles, different titles, different needs, different functions, and as they really instrument data in their business, we are growing that user base overall. And these people, as they are making better business decisions that drive their business in a meaningful way towards value, they need fresh, reliable data they can trust. So we have the same 4 V's with them. And just like within data supply, the rate of change in data demand is exponential. More people need more data in more places, and the consumerization of IT has really shown that individuals want it in a sort of a native, personal, immediate way, the way that they would demand apps from an application store or something along those lines, right? So data demand is increasingly a challenge, and in particular, managing large numbers of ad hoc requests from users who are constantly hungry, starving for more data to do their jobs better. So what has really been holding us back is the stack or the systems or the teams that sit between supply and demand. As data people, as data teams, as specialists with data and analytics, we sit between supply and demand. And it's our task primarily to figure out how to tie those two together to move our organizations forward strategically. And really, there's been 4 big parts of the data stack to think about: infrastructure and databases, ETL, the movement of data, and then the analysis of that data overall. And historically, each one of these has had challenges. No one has not evolved dramatically in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years. We have seen some really dramatic changes. And this is a place where my company, Looker, has spent a lot of time thinking, and we've come to some conclusions about how these things are working and panning out, and it's essentially why we exist. So we see 3 trends in data and databases which have been consistent over the last 3 to 5 years that we believe will continue to move forward. And as you go about building an analytics system or systems or a data stack or stacks inside your organization, these are really important to think about. From an infrastructure perspective, the move to cloud has been transformational. And in particular, the cloud-based massively parallel processing databases that you can now get at extremely low cost from any one of a number of providers. They provide immediate scale. They provide elasticity and concurrency and a bunch of other great features. I was not long ago at a conference, and the keynote speaker mentioned that the biggest problem they had with serving data to their data consumers inside their organization was that they had to choose between letting analysts do queries against the database or letting the data scientists do queries against the database because they didn't have enough database performance to serve both. And the change to a cloud-based, massively parallel processing database where you just can scale unbelievably and elastically that makes that a concern of the past. The reality is with these new advances in technology, databases are cheaper than ever before, they're more powerful than ever before, they're larger than ever before, and it's absolutely freed up our ability to connect supply and demand in a really powerful and meaningful way. Now, to get the data into something like a cloud-based database or data warehouse, data lake, is still complex, but is simplifying. It has simplified over recent years. So one of the things that simplifies the ETL, the extract, transform, load process for data, is that now that the databases are very, very quick and can run complex queries at relatively low cost massively, the need to transform all your data at the time it is loaded into your data warehouse is reduced. You just don't need to do as much transformation. You don't need to do as much work ahead of time to load it into a queryable environment than you had to do before, because you're not trying to save your database from being overloaded. You're not trying to reduce the resource consumption against those databases as much as you were before. Now, we haven't really reached a true transform on query environment yet, even though I have that here. I like to think of it as big E, little t, big L, right? So you do a little bit of transformation in that process. And a lot of that can now be automated as well. So there are a bunch of vendors out there that help with ETL, that move the data for you, make it presentable and available or virtualized so that it is available all in one place to the database for querying. And that has really changed the complexity of the data engineering component of our jobs and made it even more powerful so that you can model the data in its native schemas and use it there. Also, you see some of these massively parallel processing databases simplifying the sharing process and the distribution process so the data can be shared between entities within a company or between companies very, very quickly and easily. It's seamless and fast. And that essentially removes the need to do ETL between those entities. And cloud-to-cloud movement in general has gotten better. I come from a physical storage background, and we used to talk about how data really has gravity. It is hard to move. There's a lot of it. It can be very expensive and difficult to store. But movement of the data is becoming easier along with data sharing, simply because of the technologies that underlie this new simplified ETL and data pipeline. Now, one thing that hasn't changed, and I think this is really exciting, is that SQL is still the standard 30 years later. It remains this great way of speaking the language of databases, of talking to databases and running queries. It is there. I don't believe that anyone has come up with a better model for describing how to query data in tabular formats than SQL pretty much ever, and that's why adoption remains universal. The vast majority of the databases you see in the new technology you see support this SQL standard in some form of SQL dialect. There's been some tweaking of SQL. But what that means is you've still got portability, you've still got the ability to just understand SQL, understand querying, and still understand how these systems work. And what we're seeing with SQL is that it can be a little bit difficult to actually understand and write it itself. As someone who has written a decent amount of SQL in my life, right, it is a challenge to write a complex SQL query and then come back a couple of weeks later and see what you did or share it with someone else. And so we have this evolution to greater portability, to a real development environment in meta languages that speak SQL and deliver it in a machine-like way. So you have more of a real development environment, more of a software engineering paradigm that then can generate the SQL that speaks directly to the database. So all three of these things mean that we can do so much more now with the data stack than we ever could before. And it's really freed us up as an industry to do something new and different. But it's still not easy. So let's assume that we actually have this perfect data stack and it all works. We're able to do all the analytics we need to because our ETL is easy. We have a powerful database that's run in the cloud and is completely flexible, right? This New Vantage survey that they did in 2019, New Vantage Partners, showed that 77% of the companies they polled still believe that business adoption is presenting a challenge to the organization. And what that means is that even if you have the perfect data stack, what you have to be thinking about is adoption. How do we do business adoption? How do we provide an application that the users, or an interface, a way for users to really access the data in a way that is meaningful? Now, you see a bunch of vendors, and Looker says it too, talking about the democratization of data or self-service analytics. And what I'm talking about is actually going a step further than that, because I think that you will see is that most people want to log into something that isn't the analytics tool in order to get the insights that they need, or they have an existing established workflow that they are going to use and that they need the data there, not in some other tool somewhere else. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how a platform approach to architecture and analytics can help resolve that particular challenge by making the data what one of my colleagues called personal and powerful, and really get that feel for actionable for them, very, very practical as well. So in this next wave is what we call the third wave of analytics and the data stack. The platform approach is really key, right? You need a platform or some tool set that can solve the range of departments' needs in analytics, that can support the new data stack and the new way that we do the technology, and put the data right where it's needed. So you need fundamentally a modern analytics architecture that is powerful and scalable, just like the databases. And in fact, one that leverages the database architecture from the big database players. They're so innovative right now that the best way to get a good database is to let them do that in the way that they can best. But you still need to remain governed and secure. And as you go through data modeling, you need to make sure this is part of governed and secure, that everyone is using the same models, that you're consistent across the organization, that you have some control, and that it's going to connect to the existing systems that you have. Because if it doesn't, it's very hard to make it productive. And I think as an industry, we agree that we need the data where it's needed. So self-service analytics is certainly that first step. But right in the user's workflow, I think, is even more valuable, and that's what breeds adoption, makes it very natural and personal to the user who wants to use data. And that idea of application fit or UI fit is really important. And then automation integration, because not every consumer of data is a human. Increasingly, the consumers of data are AI, ML tools, data science, third-party integrated systems. And so you need to make sure that automation integration is key as you go about building a data platform. There's one thing missing here in the middle, and that is the ability to make both of these components agile and extensible. Because data and analytics, I think if you're like a digital forensics expert, you can look at analytics, you can look at the model that people build, and you could figure out retrospectively, without knowing anything about the business, what that business does, where they provide value, what their customers think of them, how powerful it is. And it's just not one size fits all in analytics. Every analytics solution needs to be as unique as your business so that you can get the value you need out quickly in a meaningful way. And so any capabilities, extensibility, feature sets, the ability to customize and change and adapt needs to be fully documented and tested. You need a robust ecosystem of partners that you're integrated with or can help integrate if someone who's developing this needs some assistance getting there. And so all those things together, a modern architecture that puts data where it's needed, but is also able to get the fit you need to be agile and extensible and to really provide what you're looking for to drive business value. That's what we call a data platform. That's that concept of bringing it all together in one place. When you're doing analytics, if you're missing one of these, you will end up with challenges later. I was actually speaking with our CEO recently, and he had a really interesting observation, and that was that if you have a modern architecture and self-service analytics, you can solve most of the analytics problems today, because really systems that do that are designed to solve what we know today as the analytics challenges that businesses face. But without this extensibility and agility and a platform approach, it's very hard to build for what we don't know is coming, right? So it's not a concept of handling the waves of change we have now, but it's knowing that there will be waves in the future, and building a system that makes you capable of adapting to those waves of change as you go without having to rip out and replace with a whole new analytics platform. So in action, these platforms make a big difference. If you've been to Europe recently, you probably know Deliveroo. They're a food delivery service. They're all over Europe and really expanding. And they put in place this self-service capability built on a data platform. And here's what they're seeing, right? They're seeing people customizing reports, exploring data much faster than ever expected, right? So this is putting data in the right hands when you can customize, when you can modify, when you can build your own as the user. It really gets to the heart of the operational efficiencies that data can help drive. Many of you probably know BuzzFeed as well, but what they were able to overcome is this idea of the data team being a gatekeeper, right? So the idea is democratizing the access to the data and also democratizing where that data is deliverable, right? So they're doing hundreds of terabytes of data and thousands of daily queries against their data sets. Supporting dashboards, building them, putting them in the right places was a real change. And the data platform really helped them solve that problem. So we did a quick survey of our customers within a year of implementing a data platform, and these are some of the things that adapting to that modern data stack, being aware of how customization and adoption and delivery makes a difference. These are some of the outcomes they see. And within that year, 85% of them are generating more trustworthy reports. They understand their customers and users better. They're reducing reliance on other tools and containing sprawl. They're uncovering new business opportunities, right? This goes to the idea of growth and revenue. It goes to the idea of efficiency and reduced costs. And it goes to the idea of reducing risk overall because you're prepared for the next thing that's coming. So it is our opinion, and this may be slightly controversial, is that the future of business intelligence, the future of analytics, really, it just isn't BI, or it isn't a BI tool. There's really one way of accessing data. The historic way of accessing data through a tool that does analytics is part of the answer for sure, but it is only part of the answer going forward. This new data demand, the new users are consuming data everywhere in systems all over the place. Right now, those systems are frequently focused on a single use case. So if you're building a system, you have to embrace this incredible diversity of demand and incredible diversity of supply at the same time. So how do you do that in a scalable way, right? Secondarily, data has to absolutely meet them where they need it. They are reluctant, most people are reluctant to log into a special tool just to do analytics unless their job is running reports. But the average user wants insights right in their workflow, where they're working right there. They're able to support current operations and processes without blowing up everything in order to do analytics better. It needs to be everywhere. Everyone needs better answers all the time. And when more people have their eyes on analytics, when more people are performing analytics, you get more insights faster, and that moves businesses along better. Pervasive access to relevant data results in better business outcomes. So when you've deployed that data platform, you solve some of the early stages of analytics maturity, some of the early challenges you see in analytics maturity. One, you can remove a lot of the silos around specific data and application because you can be very consistent with things. You can avoid isolating logic or analytics in a workbook, build globally consistent metrics, move up and start taking advantage of some of the more exciting technologies that are out there, AI and ML and advanced analytics. And ultimately, right, we hope to all achieve nirvana of analytics everywhere. But this is a journey. So every company, every division within a company, every project within the division within a company is at some state of analytics maturity. The idea of underlying data platform is very, very powerful. And what it does is it means moving up into the right here, becoming more mature in the way you address analytics in any given project or department or organization becomes easier because you have the underlying technology that supports all of these types of initiatives as we go forward. So with that, I'm about out of time, and I understand that I'm between us and our panel guests who are, I think, amazingly interesting. So with that, I want to just say thank you for listening to this preamble from me, and you can always reach out to me if you'd like to and learn more about us at Looker if you feel so inclined.
Thank you, Joel. As a reminder to all of our listeners, please submit any questions that you have in the Q&A interface. And following the panel discussion, we have set aside some time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. We'll now kick off our panel discussion titled Empowering Business Through Data. Today's panel will also be moderated by Joel McKelvey. Joel, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So we have some really fantastic speakers here on our panel that I think you're really going to enjoy listening to. But what we've done is we've prepared some questions ahead of time that we think will be germane. And so what I'm going to do is ask them these specific questions and have them introduce themselves as we go. I think what they have to say about who they are and what they do, and then answers to the questions make a big difference. So earlier, I was talking about discussing the evolution of business intelligence, new technology, how that technology is paving the way for data and data platforms. So I would like to start with Alex Thompson from Hallmark Cards. Alex, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and then how you've started implementing some of these new technologies, such as AI or new data strategies.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction there. My name is Alex Thompson. I lead our data engineering practice at Hallmark Cards in Kansas City. Prior to that, I was a data scientist also at Hallmark Beauty Cards and then elsewhere before that. And I think you bring up a really good point there. You said it might be a little bit controversial, but I agree with you 100%, that BI is not about a tool. So one of the things that I share at our organization is that for so long, business intelligence has been seen as a central organization for knowledge about the business. And, business intelligence analysts have this deep understanding of what makes the business grow and how it makes more money. But that concept is rapidly changing, and business intelligence is being federated throughout the organization. So you heard talk of, data scientists, data engineers, business intelligence analysts, and rather than an executive or a manager going to the BI team and saying, hey, I need an answer to a question, those executives and leaders should be enabled with analytics everywhere, as you mentioned. And to me, that is the biggest transformation, the biggest cultural shift that has to happen. And, the way that we think about that is embedding analytics and saying, I have a data. So, the one example that I'll give in terms of how we bring AI, and in this case, I'll use AI as a more of an umbrella term that includes machine learning, deep learning, and all that sort of stuff. But the point is that when we have a data scientist who implements a model and then validates it and wants to deploy it, that deployment is then integrated into our entire processes. It's not a model that has, a score for a consumer that data scientist has access to. Rather, that model is pushed into new techniques and technologies like in-database analytics, where someone is able to push R or Python to traditional relational database management systems. So to me, that's one big advancement that we're seeing, is the ability to push data science, which has been outside of sort of traditional platforms, into those traditional platforms for the value that is able to be federated across the organization. And then so once that sort of a model is pushed out to platforms that everyone has access to, data visualization, data democratization, all sorts of other tools that are already connected can leverage that sort of unique skill and talent of a data scientist, as just one example. And then you have executives who now have access to a machine learning model or a neural network, but they have access to it in a way that they can actually see meaning in it. It's connected to a data visualization that allows them to move a slider, which changes the variables in the model, or allows them to see profit changes as they go through various questions or what-if solutions. So to me, that's, sort of the core of what's happening in the change of BI, is the sense of not seeing business intelligence as an organization that houses and controls sort of all the access to data and the knowledge about business performance, but that gets federated across the organization. So that's what I would share about what I see.
Fantastic. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Kurt, maybe you want to introduce yourself too and weigh in on the topic?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Kurt Carver. I'm the Vice President and CIO at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. We're a very large medical university, in fact, third largest public health care system in the United States. And so we use data across a lot of systems. I'm going to give a really practical example of how we're implementing artificial intelligence into our data platforms. Hopefully most of you are familiar with universities, but if you think about it, the best professors that are out there are sending a note to their students if their students are not coming to class, and they're sending a congratulatory note to the students if they do really well on any of the assessments or evaluations, you know, the quizzes, midterms, finals, papers, that sort of stuff. And then they're sending a different type of note if the student is not doing so well on those formal assessments. And so what we've done to the delight of the faculty is we've automated those systems, built AI assistants that the faculty can use. They construct messages that reach out to the students if they're not attending class based on some timeline. Different notes attached with the different formal evaluation systems or evaluations that are being used within the course. And then once the instructor establishes it once, then the AI agents automatically send those messages and follow up. And having used this now for a couple of years, I'll tell you, first of all, the students all think that it's the actual professor sending the note. They are 100% appreciative of sending the note. When a note is sent on attendance, there is a 100% change in student behavior. They all respond back, they say this is what's going on, and they all start coming to class again. Or they drop the class, but that's fine too, because then there's no suspense. You kind of know what's going on. They think the notes, the congratulatory notes, are funny. Again, so they're attributing humor to a note that's really being generated by an AI element. And all of this positively not only influences students completing the class and progressing towards their degrees, but also positively influences student ratings of professors. And so the students that are the professors that are using these tools are creating a competitive advantage compared to the other professors that are not using these tools. And so we have started implementing artificial intelligence. We've started at those core determining factors of, that are student-centric and based on will they be successful in a class or not. And that's really tied back to attendance, and it's tied to performance. No big surprise there. And so hopefully that gives a great example of how we're using AI in our data platforms and strategies.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I know that as the pressures for class size and student performance increase, that's maybe one way to help fill that gap for you guys. Really important work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You have a class of 300, it's really hard to individually connect with all of them without an AI agent helping you.
But you want them to be well educated. They are going out and practicing medicine. So that's fantastic. So, Sherry, you're in a related field here. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what kind of advanced data strategies you might be using in your role?
Sure. I'm Sherry Zink. I'm Senior Vice President, Chief Data and Engagement Officer for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. I've been in this role at Blue Cross for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was Vice President of Reporting and Analytics for Optum. And then prior to that, served in several roles at Cigna throughout my career. But when we think about, artificial intelligence, there's a couple of things that we consider. One of the things is there's a huge cultural shift as you start to think about how your data structures and your skill sets are going to need to shift as you move from your current BI platform into a more artificial intelligence. So one of the things that we've done is a couple of things. One is we've looked at our existing technology that's very relational database structured, and looked at what additional technology we needed to add in to kind of bring in this hybrid cloud, more modern techniques around natural language processing, artificial intelligence, voice-activated learnings from that perspective, and have worked on modernizing our platform. Now, what that really means is that people start to get a little scared of that, because when you think about typical data management folks, typical data scientists, data analysts, they're very used to working in a relational database environment with, your traditional tools like SQL. And when you start to think about moving into a more modernized structure around AI, it's object-oriented programming through Python, it's new different types of technology. And so one of the things that we did is we took a skills assessment across our organization to say, where are we today as an organization? Where do we have the aptitude for people who already have these skills, and where are we going to have to bring training in so that people feel like that they're very comfortable in being able to leverage these new technologies? Because at the end of the day, I agree with you, Alex, that it is the adoption is a huge piece. And it's not just adoption across the business, it's adoption by your own data analyst and working in a different way than what they do today. Because I tell my analysts all the time, you don't necessarily have to know the next level of drill down that you need to do. You can let the machine tell you what's the right pattern and what's the right drill down. And so what we've been looking at is we've actually started to embed natural language processing into some of our processes. And what that's allowed us to do is really understand, how do we personalize our outreach more effectively? How do we understand what is the causality around the interventions or the outreach strategies that we have? And then really getting that back into our business hands. But I would say for us, we're kind of in the infancy stages of that. We've just started implementing our platform, coming up with those use cases, and looking at the training and the technology that we're going to need to start to push that forward.
That really resonates with what I've been hearing too, is that challenge of bringing the analytics team forward as well, because their skills are so valuable to an organization, and they're so well respected in the organization that some of those changes can be a little challenging to implement, to have them adopt. We also see it at Looker. We see a lot of the analysts going into more of a developer mindset, like you mentioned, Sherry, object-oriented programming and those sorts of things, right? That's a little different from the way they used to address stuff in SQL. It's a pretty big change.
Yeah, and I think what we hear from our teams a lot of time is, please help us get there, because we want to be relevant in the future. And so I think it's very important as an organization, as you think about this journey, how do you make sure that your existing staff is getting up to speed and feels relevant, because they're going to represent 80 to 90% of the people that you have in your organization. So as we've thought about the AI journey, not only have we thought about how we're going to embed this in existing business processes and get the adoption, but also how do we make sure that we're bringing our teams along so that they feel included and that they're a part of that decision-making process, and that they feel empowered to be successful.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. So, Tony, would you do us a favor and introduce yourself really quickly and let us know how your team might be using some of what the analysts are calling these advanced analytics tools to move your business?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Odunton. I currently lead some of the data infrastructure within the AI GCT organization. And currently what we're looking at when it comes to AI basically is we're changing the manners of how we're doing stuff. One, due to the fact that now we're actually using, basically what we call the outside data within our, our data sets to actually make a lot of decisions, basically. So, and in order to be able to effectively do that, we're basically using some form of, what we call probability algorithm to do, to do a lot of stuff that we're doing. We're trying to, kind of be proactive and think, coming from an insurance perspective, dealing with a lot of natural disaster and all that, we're trying to know when before things happen. And in order to do that, we can't do that, with a large data set, just, querying SQL. I think where we're going, it's far beyond using the natural SQL, which is the, to do a lot of this stuff. Where we are right now is the implementation whereby majority of the stuff we're doing goes into cloud, and then we're able to make decisions on stuff that is yet to happen, most especially when it comes to, in the insurance aspect. So one of the other part that we're doing is, when it comes to being cost effective, right, we're trying to limit, the footprint of employees within different locations. And how are we doing that? We're basically building different infrastructure around AI to determine where most of our employees go into office and all that. So we're basically crawling all this information, mining all this large data set, and then building AI in between all this to actually be our determinant rather than, trying to project, by ourselves. Because in the past, we've leveraged more on, using SQLs, doing analytics, but it's far beyond that right now. We're basically looking at how we can, apply context, interact, provide information, and then kind of build relevance around our information, and at the same time, build different modules that can, age over time, and to do a lot of what we're doing, basically.
Tony, I think that's a really good point, right? That a lot of times AI and machine learning can be a little bit, for lack of a better term, aspirational, or a little bit of a dream for a lot of folks. And I think it's interesting what you're doing is these really relatively concrete, tactical efficiency projects using AI, which can make such a dramatic difference to a business. It may not be quite as sexy figuring out where your employees are sitting and optimizing for that, but it can sure impact your bottom line. It makes a big difference. So I want to go back to a second to what Alex said earlier. Alex, you mentioned earlier this idea of the company assuming that the data team is just going to solve everything for it. So I'm going to read you a quick quote from Carolyn Carruthers and Peter Jackson's book. It's called the CDO Playbook. I don't know if you guys have read it, but the quote is, hiring a chief data officer doesn't absolve the rest of the company from looking after data. It doesn't suddenly become the CDO's problem, so you don't need to worry about it anymore. And from that, based on what you said, Alex, this next question is kind of natural. And I'd like to hand it over to you, Sherry. And it's how you've been working to ensure business intelligence, or maybe analytics as a larger construct, is successfully evolving, and you mentioned adopting, actually, within your organization. How are you working to make sure that things like data-driven business decisions are really what's taking place?
Yeah, I think that it really starts with strategy and understanding, how you want to position data as a strategic asset in your company. And so one of the things that I have done is, of course, we have gotten our senior leadership team very heavily involved in how we are going to leverage data in the future to really drive business value. And as part of that, we have a process where every year we set our corporate priorities. And our corporate priorities are geared around very different business lines, but it's very interesting because every single year there is a data play in one of those corporate priorities that my team and I have a focus on. And then as we started looking at corporate priorities this year, one of the priorities is enable better care through data, and that means sharing it with more effectively with our members, our providers, and our internal stakeholders to ensure that we can improve upon that member experience across every single touch point that we have. And so one of the ways to really help the business understand where those opportunities are is we just completed our 3-year data and analytics strategy, where we went through and we met with probably 60 people across the organization, talked a little bit about their pain points and how we could help them with those pain points. When we finished with those interviews, we had about 150 capability needs that we culled down into 34 use cases. Then our senior leadership team actually prioritized those use cases from 1 to 34. And with each of those, we talked about what was the implementation, what was the prerequisite to implementation. And about 60% of the cases that were identified this year, we have to have artificial intelligence, machine learning have a play and a role in that in order to successfully drive those use cases. So getting that information out in front of all of our business stakeholders, helping them understand where those opportunities to leverage their data assets are, and then giving them ability to weigh in on where that prioritization lands is one aspect of that puzzle, because now they feel like they have ownership in the success of that project and in that data. On the flip side, we also try to make sure that we're including our data and analytics teams as we start to prioritize those use cases so that they understand where the opportunities are for them to connect and how they can pull this information into either existing applications that they have, new applications that they want to do with the business. And then I think the third area is empowering our data analysts with the technology and information that they need in order to be successful to deliver on those strategic use cases and where we want to go. So that is kind of the way that we've approached it. And then finally, the way that this also works in our company is we all have corporate goals. So it's built into our job performance goals. So each of us have that into our goals, and it's also built into our corporate incentive program. So there's certain aspects of data and things that we have to deliver on, and we're actually, it's part of our performance metrics and our incentive goals to make sure that we're delivering on that.
That's fantastic, Sherry. It's a data-driven approach to becoming data-driven, which I think is pretty fantastic. I mean, Forrester had a recent study by Dr. Bellison, and she wrote that CDOs are appointed to do business objectives, right? Meet business objectives. It's not about Tony was talking about the practical uses of AI, right? It's not about theoretical, right? It's about really moving the business forward. So just quickly, I want to remind attendees that if you'd like to ask questions, you have in your interface the ability to do that, and we're looking forward to answering some of those in just a little bit once we've walked through the panel for a little bit. So please do that if you get a chance. With that, Alex, I'd like to bump back to you to build on what Sherry was saying. Have you seen business decisions in your org really garner positive results? Is that helping with adoption for you?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we all are really conscious of is that this transformation, how business intelligence transforms over time is of fundamental importance. And the best way to make that happen is to have leadership who is pushing it, right? And, Sherry really talked about having performance goals, at the company level and at the individual level. And that sort of motivation really transforms. The Cherry story was great about how they're implementing it. I just want to put a little bit of emphasis on, sort of the bottom-up approach. And so one of the things that we do at Hallmark is sort of try to build what I call this sort of data revolution. So in addition to our senior leaders sort of modeling the behavior of a data-driven organization, we also try to have things like tech talks and bring various organizations from within Hallmark together to talk about problems from the perspective of data. So we may talk about cloud, or we may talk about AI or machine learning, and give the entire community an opportunity to sort of sit and hear both the theory and the practical implications of new technology. So anytime you're having this sort of transition, this sort of fundamental shift in the way, not just that business is being done, but the way that leaders and analysts are thinking about business, there can be resistance that's based on a lack of knowledge. And if you can undercut that resistance by giving people the knowledge that they have, it turns the entire it's another way to turn the entire organization into, having data as like a core corporate identity. So we try to do sort of technical talks that people can come to, we take our data scientists and sort of put them on a roadshow to teams that they might otherwise not interact with, but those teams are hearing about big data and Hadoop and all sorts of other things. But by doing that and then, going to various leaders in their team meetings, and it's really sort of an educational component that allows individuals who may not be precisely touching on this transformation that's happening in BI to get more familiar with it and sort of get caught up in the movement. So, like I said, I think having this transformation being pushed from the top is critical. There are also other components. One of the things that I just want to emphasize is the ability to sort of spread that knowledge about the transformation across the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Tony, you mentioned some of the successes you had or some of the goals that you have, this tactical needs for the business that you're meeting with analytics and some of this advanced analytics stuff. Building on what Alex just said about adoption, have you had successes with some of those projects? How have they worked on adoption, particularly as he was talking about from a bottoms-up approach? Has that had an impact for you in your role?
Yeah, because to be candid, we've had a lot of adoption. Like what Sherry said, it basically starts from the bottom downward spiral, because basically we have an idea, we present it to the senior leadership, and we're ready to drive them, through the process. We're not just deploying and saying, figure it out. We're walking through the steps together, and it comes to, the cycle of, what are we deploying? What value is it adding? And if it's really going to add this value, how do we make sure that it's well adopted? And basically, the way we present it, it's always in two aspects. We present it as a, data for defense and offense, right? We're looking at how can we minimize the downside of risk when it comes to data within the firm. And then two, how can we leverage also on the offensive side to be more customer focused and customer centric, right? So, and in order to do that, all senior leadership are interested in that. One, two, we are able to create a process of adoption, which is we start from at what level of value, what are we trying to improve on, what is the current status of that we're improving on. And when it comes to data analytics, basically, everything within our firm is basically data. No decision is made without data. In order to, if people that have been following about the company has been going through a lot of transition and all that, and for us to be really successful with those transitions, it has been data that has been helping us to say, this is where to cut costs. This is, and then looking across the entire organization, we're talking about a global organization, looking across the entire organization, it requires a lot of understanding how the data works and how the businesses work. And this only comes through the data. So by using the offensive aspect of the data, we're able to, one, meet the customer need. What product are we rolling out? How are we rolling it out? How is it going to be adopted by the client, by our clients? And at the same time, how are we minimizing our risks on the defensive side of our data? So those are the two approaches that when we are presenting, those are the two approaches that we look at. And every year, we build more into the data aspect of what we do. Like, what else can we be looking at? What analytics can we be looking at? How do we build this thing? Because, secondary aspect of it is the tool that we're using to present, to display this. But the most important thing is, how are we using this data? Is it really, how are we using it? And how are we making sure that we're making the right decision with data? Because for one, AIG is a data-driven organization, and no decision has been made in the last 3 years without data. And this comes with building different models when it comes to, it starts from HR to corporate to underwriters to even to the risk analysts. Everybody has to understand how those data affect them. So one, the adoption is becoming really easy because of the strategy whereby we, as part of, we're mining the data, we're presenting the analytics, we are also part of your team. So the way we build it, the team is every team, every businesses have different data scientists, different engineers, and we all meet together to actually, work together to make sure that those teams are being fostered to achieve their common goals.
Yeah, it sounds like you're actually pretty mature from an analytics deployment and use of the advanced analytics tool set. That's pretty impressive. I like your statement. Like, we don't make decisions until we have some data to back that up. That's the very epitome of being data-driven. Kurt, just a quick question. So, based on what the other panelists have said, have you seen this data-driven approach to business decisions, to how you work your business, deliver some real positive results? And if so, what types of results have you seen?
Oh, it's a great question, and so I'll give you a negative result and a positive result. In a previous life, I was a Army officer for 27 years, and part of that was deployed to South Korea with 2nd Infantry Division, and the Army had deployed a decision support system to support, the 18,000 men and women in the division in case there was a war. And it was a modified version of Unix being run by soldiers, many of which only had a high school education. There came a point where the division commander became so frustrated, he literally kicked the terminal off the desk and then ordered me to lock all the terminals up in a Connex, and gave me $100,000 and 5 weeks to build a new system. Very exciting. And so we ended up building, and we had to run this over a really low bandwidth system. So we ended up building a web-based decision support system that really drove towards hard decisions as it related to having situational awareness of what's going on in the battlefield. And for corporations, it would be what's going on in the company and in the environment. And the Chief of Staff of the Army, the top-ranking general of the Army, actually came to Korea because the system had been so successful. And it doesn't sound like much, but what it was doing is it was shaving off about 30 minutes in our decision-making cycle. And it was specifically effective of determining where the decisive point on the battlefield would be and when to commit the reserves. And so it created a huge competitive advantage for that division. There are 10 divisions in the Army. 5 of the divisions decided not to use the official Army system, but to use this ad hoc system that we had built in Korea. And we ended up fighting a good chunk of the Bosnian War using this system that was adopted because it supported that competitive advantage in data-driven decision-making. So hopefully that's a good example of a negative, and a good example, don't use operating systems that your customers have no idea how to use, and definitely don't heavily customize them so it makes it truly impossible. And the other, the advantage to really sit down with a customer, this is one of our, this is back in the mid-90s, but it was a sprint. A one-star general sat down with us daily, and at the time I was a major, but sat down with us daily to work on what would go into today's production so that we had this system optimized.
Yeah, that's a literal war story from the data trenches. My questions, I'm fond of them, but I think we probably want to get to the audience questions quickly. So before we do that, maybe we could do just a really quick round robin between all of you. And if there was one best practice or one thing that you would like people to take away to help them implement data or to overcome old and new business challenges around data and becoming data-driven, what would it be? To you, Sherry, I know it's a surprise, but what's one thing you think people should take away, or one tip or trick that you would leave them with?
Yeah, I think just making sure that whatever you do is relevant to the business, and that you can show them the outcome. And then the only other thing that I would say, make sure you build some quick wins into your strategy, because once people see how this affects their ability to work smarter or gain revenue, et cetera, then you're going to be able to move forward with other use cases.
Yeah, that really builds the political will to continue to expand the data culture, definitely. Alex, any quick tips for our audience?
Yeah, the last thing I would say, I've sort of said it already. And, there is no technology, no technique, no method, no AI that can really make this transformation unless, it's seen as a cultural transformation. I think it's really important to understand the human impact in this data revolution. And so in addition to all the technology and all the other good things that have to be done, there has to be explicit consideration of how people in an organization are going to adapt to these radical changes.
Yeah, we've really seen that at Looker. I mean, my basic philosophy on this is that technology can be complex, but it still is nowhere near as complex as the people we're trying to serve with it, right? Absolutely. Tony, do you have any tips you'd like to share before we move into the audience questions?
Yeah, I think I'm basically going to say the same thing about people, because I think people are actually the most determinant of whatever your data product you're rolling out, which is number one. And number two is make it simple, from the point, my own point of view, based on my knowledge of the, dealing with new products when it comes to data product, business intelligence, reporting, analytics. Make it simple from the scratch, create controls and make it really flexible for the user. I think with that, it's easy to be adopted, and then we can start building on that, because that's when they see the value, when it's really simple from the scratch.
Yep. So, Kurt, any last tip as our last thing before we go into the audience Q&A?
Yeah, our mantra in everything we do with data is a co-authorship. Get everybody involved, crowdsource, but make sure that you're really addressing the requirements, that everybody has a voice, and that everybody may not be on your team, so you have to cast a wide net to get people involved so that you're solving the most relevant data needs of the organization, because otherwise you're going to end up answering questions that really aren't pertinent to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. So thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Sherry, Alex, Tony, and of course Kurt for answering my questions here for the last few minutes. I really appreciate it. I wish we could go on forever, but unfortunately we can't. And thank you to the people who have been submitting questions and who have stuck with us here. What I'd like to do now is go back to Natasha, and she'll lead us going through the audience Q&A.
Yes, thank you to the panelists and Joel for doing such a great job and moderating. We are now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience during the discussion. The first question I see is, what skill sets do you look for in new employees to properly tackle data-driven business strategies?
Anybody want to hop in on that one?
This is Alex.
Great.
Like I said, I think that in terms of, this data revolution that's happening, the transformation that's happening, it's really important to be precise about the role that's being filled. So if you are looking to transform your business intelligence team to a data engineering team, then, I would say R and or Python plus SQL, and then something in the realm of big data, right? Spark or something like that. But if you are looking for someone who is a business analyst, you want someone who has deep knowledge of whatever industry you're in, and then on the technical side, I would, really emphasize a strong background in statistics and some analytic capability. It may not be R Python, it may be something in Excel or something.
Yeah, and this is Sherry. Just to kind of add on to that, I think it's very important because especially as you're trying to do this transformation, you really need to be able to tell a story with your data, and you need to be able to visualize it in a simplistic form where people can see the value proposition. So one of the things that we've also tried to make sure that we look for are what we call data journalists or data visualization experts that will help you really showcase that information so that it's meaningful and simplistic to your audience. So I think that's another, and the storytelling aspect of it is very important. So what we see is we kind of include, we have a lot of our technical folks, but then we also have some people that come from a marketing background that really understand how to tell that story with the data and how to educate the rest of our team on how to do that.
Does anybody else want to add to that? If not, we'll get to that.
I thought those were great answers.
Excellent. Okay, so next question. Did you need to go through a data cleansing process before implementing these? If so, what are some suggested best practices for?
This is Kurt. I can comment on that. Again, in a previous role, I was a vice chancellor for 36 universities, and so we had data coming in from more than 300,000 students at those 36 universities, and there was always this constant tension between developing new functionality and going back and cleansing data, and that cleansing of data, the data would organize itself into eras of different data standards if you're going back 20 or 30 years and looking at things. And the task of cleansing or standardizing all of that would consume the entire work effort of the staff forever if that's all you did. So it was a balancing act of do enough cleansing where it would change a decision. If it would not change a decision, or you already had census data locked in, then there was no value in going back, and your effort was better spent on developing new functionality, more reports, new nuanced ways of looking at things, more partnerships, so that you had a more holistic view of what was going on. So that requires judgment and wisdom from the data scientists and from the leaders of those technology organizations as they're balancing the two competing needs between cleansing previous data or adding new functionality to the organization.
Great. Yeah, and the one thing that I would just add to that we've kind of done in our organization, I think it's very important to have a strong data governance structure around this, because again, you're going to want that tie into the business to understand what are those data elements that really need to be cleansed and need to be 100% accurate versus where you're kind of doing data discovery. So the way that we've done that is through our data governance program that also includes our data quality, and we have work groups and we have a prioritization committee that determines the amount of cleansing that we need to do with the information that we have sitting within our warehouse.
So this is Joel, and we see that same thing. I like Sherry and Kurt's approach, this practical and tactical but governed. I think we do have a tendency to want just to keep our houses clean and to do a lot of prep work ahead of time. And some of that, I think, is a holdover from the fact that if we didn't do it before we needed the queries, our queries would take forever and everything would kind of blow up and it wouldn't work out. Now what we're seeing is that you can be a lot more tactical about it and wait later in the process before you invest in modifying your data or changing your data, making it, changing schema, doing transforms on it, just because you have the power to do it later in the process. So you don't have to invest ahead of time in something that potentially you won't be using.
Okay, I think we have room for one more question. This question is, will you expand and give examples about what it means to you to get data to users in their own context versus sending them to the analytics tool, for example, Tableau?
This is Kurt. We're going through that process right now. Having built, previous systems where, we had a set number of answers to a set number of questions, and we centrally controlled all of that. And the challenges, our current approach is really about building a data lake. And we'll make sure that the fish in the lake are safe. The folks that need the data are the fishermen. We really don't care what kind of a fishing pole they use to fish. And some of the fish we're going to govern to make sure that it doesn't have mercury or anything involved with it, and that you know exactly what you're getting. And some of the fish are going to have less governance on it because we don't need to do all that data validation associated with it, but we want to have that data available. And so that's the metaphor that we're using. I think it's an appropriate metaphor, and it represents a change that lends towards self-reporting. But one other thing, I run the IT group. The reporters are not going to be in my group. The reporters will be outside of IT. I've done it both ways, and I just kind of balk at the idea that IT is the translator of business needs. I think the report writers need to be outside of IT.
Yeah, and this is Sherry.
Alex Thompson. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll just really quickly, one of the terms that I'm really trying to share at Hallmark is the concept of data virtualization. And, it's just a concept that everyone should have access to the data that they're allowed to see whenever, wherever, and on whatever device. And the way that happens, at least for me, is to identify key centralized or enterprise level platforms that deliver, that are connected to whatever data visualization tool, whatever, distributed NoSQL, whatever the databases are or tools that exist that the business users are have access to and are familiar with. Underneath that are enterprise level platforms that are connected and have that data governance, the data security, and all the things at whatever level is necessary for that. So just want to say that quickly. Sorry, Sherry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, just real quickly, one of the things that we always try to make sure that we do in every single analytic project is we consider people, process, and technology. And what I mean by that is there's going to be downstream business users that are going to leverage this information, so we have to make sure we have the training in place to help educate them on how to use it and why it's valuable to them. The second thing is the process, so we have to get it into their workflow. And then the third thing is the technology, which could be the combined technology between how we're pulling the analytics versus the operational system that needs to feed the information. So to give you a couple of examples that we have an ID strat process that helps us tee up individuals to understand where we might need to outreach to them or get involved or help them navigate through the healthcare system more effectively. We have predictive models. We have about 70 predictive models that run, but ultimately what happens is there's a scoring model that gets implemented into our Care Advance system, which all of our nurses can see. So if a person is managing or working with that person, they can see all of the opportunities that they have with that individual. In addition, we connect that to the consumer advisors. So if we've got someone calling in that has a specific issue, they can see all of that data and they can act upon that data. And so that's one way that we've done it, is to try to make sure that we're embedding those analytics in the downstream operational systems, because that's really where the workflow is. It's not coming outside of the workflow and going over to a Tableau dashboard and trying to find insights. It's got to be embedded. And then another thing that we've done is actually we have embedded algorithms within an application that is externally facing to our providers where they can come in and see that information. So I think making sure that you're considering how those analytics are going to play into your downstream operational systems is really how you're going to get the adoption and your business users seeing the value proposition that the data and analytics brings.
Yeah, Sherry, so this is Joel. I totally agree with that, and I like what you said as well, Alex. I think we find that people with functions inside an organization, and I'm speaking as a vendor who builds embedded analytics and dashboarding tools and all those things, right? People with these individual business functions, they're used to some set of tools, some set of workflows where they are every day doing their jobs, and they just need the data to do their jobs better. And when we place the requirement for them to go into some business intelligence interface on them, that takes time, it wastes resources, it doesn't feel native or comfortable, it's not a part of their workflow. Adoption suffers there. Whereas if, let's say, you're using a CRM tool, maybe you can get access to embedded analytics right there in a pane in that tool, make decisions about how you approach customers. Or you're working in HR and you're looking at an HR tool and you can see it there. Or you're working in some finance tool, and right there is the analytics you need to do. It's right there when you need it in a way that makes that difference. And that's why I make that comment about the future of BI doesn't feel like BI, right? It feels like I'm doing my job better in the way I'm used to, and I just happen to have more data to be able to do it. And what I liked about what you said, Alex, is you have all those individual, almost personal expressions of how you do your job, your workflow that works, Sherry, that you were mentioning. And it needs to be fed by this comprehensive, enterprise-wide platform that's going to give you the right data, the right governance, the right security, even the right metrics there, rather than kick you out and make you do it on your own. But it's also not going to force you to become a data scientist who's working in the core of the data, doing the transforms yourself. It's going to give you a comfortable place to get the data you need to make better decisions in your workflow.
Great, thank you so much for that. I just want to take the time to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic. Enjoy the rest of your day.